Okay, thank you very much, Matthew, for giving me the possibility of presenting this work, and to John for having stimulated my thought. In progress is not the word for this work. It's even less than in progress, so bear with me with this. It's only a bunch of ideas. And also it's very similar to what Rob, in spirit, to what Rob said, but it's narrower in the scope, okay? I will raise possibly one doubt. And also the title is wrong, because I'm going to say nothing about possibility. Possibly I say something about plausibility in a sense I'm trying to clarify in a moment. And also a caveat, I'm using this because John is adding, and I didn't know when I wrote, so I'm using only this. So I'm not so sure that what I'm saying is valid after John changed a bit the theory in the lecture again. So, okay, this is one of my questions now. Okay, so the general question I would like to raise is this. Okay, I'm using efficiency without sacrifice, the label that John is using in climate matters. And the idea is this a short or a long-term policy? And assuming that it is some of this or both, it is ethically plausible as a strategy. Obviously, John is separating ethics from economics in a sense, even though in a recent paper he's writing that ethics and economics should be kept unified. So it seems to me I'm allowed to raise these questions. And in particular, I would like to consider two assumptions that John very clearly stated in the first lectures on Tuesday. The idea is that future generations will be richer than us, and that apart from maldistribution, which is a problem I'm not tackling here, and John is not considering, there is no injustice in what we are doing to future generation, because harms from climate change, I'm going to call climate-related harm, can be compensated in virtue of the fact that future generations will be richer. Okay, so I'm considering those two assumptions, and I'm raising some doubts. Now, Rob said that Duncan Foley has a very simplified analysis, and perhaps John, and I'm using an even more simplified analysis, so I would be even more naive. I'm using all these items, 4 items, so harm, resources, gain in resources, loss in resources, and emission cuts. And my reconstruction of efficiency without sacrifice will be done in this way, assuming that there are 2 generations, okay, G1 and G2. So if G1 is cutting emissions, G2 has less harms. And G1 can decide to cutting emissions and to compensate through having an increased consumption of resources, which is R, capital R. And this leads generation 2 to have a loss in resources. And this is the upshot, okay? We have emission cut in generation 1, we have less harm in generation 2, and we have less resources in generation 2. Okay, and so it seems that 4 can be derived from 1, 2, and 3 in a loose sense of derivation. And also it seems that the core of what John is proposing, I'm not using the economic strategy in terms of Pareto optimality, but should be coincident that if generation 2 wants 1, which is good for them, they should accept 4, because the system of compensation should be kept. Okay, so that's an analysis I hope faithful. Now, I'm considering 3 possible implementation strategies, 3 possible ways to implement efficiency without sacrifice. And they are very simple, and obviously they are not the only possible ones. Those are only the 3 possibilities they go to my mind immediately. One idea is that we could do efficiency without sacrifice one shot, only once, and we can extend to 2 generations, and then stop. Another application is that we can have a one shot, but also extending, covering the costs for many generations, not infinite, but many generations, indefinite. And the third is that can we have a kind of iterated application? So each generation is using the strategy for the next generation and so on. So I'm considering what the results of this would be. And basically what I'm saying is this, that the first one cannot be the strategy, because it's not really much different from business as usual. So there is something that John says in Climate Matters, that efficiency without sacrifice is an intermediate step to efficiency with sacrifice. It could be used as a kind of policy, but it seems to me that one shot to generation is not helpful to move, because it's not very different. And multi-generational application, one shot and iterated approach can lead to something that I am going to call a kind of repugnant conclusion scenarios. I will say something more on this. Okay, so this is my conclusion. I need some assumptions. John says that efficiency without sacrifice could solve the problem of climate change. I'm not very clear about that. Because, obviously eliminating any climate change is impossible. What John could have in mind is that could avoid dangerous climate change. But John says that the notion of dangerousness is plainly an ethical notion. And so if we find ethically implausible those strategies, we could say that those strategies are not solving climate change. But anyway, I'm assuming that efficiency without sacrifice is less than efficiency with sacrifice. I'm assuming, for the sake of the fact that they should be different, that efficiency without sacrifice produce more harm than efficiency with sacrifice. This is an assumption I'm using. And also I'm using some assumptions from the science. I'm assuming that climate harms are cumulative. They will be magnified across generations. And also I'm assuming that there is a kind of non-linear increase of harms across generations. This could be contentious, but there are scientists saying this. And in the recent IPCC report, there are people, and there is a section on cumulation. Okay, so assuming this, consider one shot, 2 generations. I'm here simply saying that this is not very, the impact of this, because of the fact that harms are cumulative, cannot be too great. Okay, basically, if only one generation do this and the other generation are doing nothing, this is not very different. It could be slightly better, but it's not very different. So I'm not going to consider this. I'm considering that this cannot be an application. And so it seems to me it's very similar to business as usual. Consider now the one-shot many generations strategy. Here the idea is that the present generation should cut its emission of an amount whose future benefits, whose future impact benefits more than compensate the losses in resources for each of many succeeding generations. This should be the deal. They will be compensated because they will gain in less harm, and we will be compensated because we can consume more resources. But we should consider many generations, so we should aggregate. So it seems that if we aggregate, we should cut a great amount of emissions, and they will inherit globally less and less resources. Let me show this in a more clearer way. Consider. This is the reconstruction I gave of the original strategy, and it is one shot. And I could have a similar reconstruction for many generations. The first generation is cutting emission, and the generation onwards are having less harms. And also the first generation is having more resources, and the other generation are having less resources, and so on. So this is application of the strategy to many generations. And I'm assuming that those generations could be aggregated. The resources, it's a global aggregation. Now, if this is the case, and if harms are cumulative, and so harms are magnifying across generations, if I keep E, the emission cut, constant in the first generation, I can say that the harm will be less and less reduced. The gain in reducing harm will be less and less across generation because there is the cumulation. So what I should do in order to guarantee to them a bit of avoidance of harm is that my emission cuts should be higher because I'm considering other generations. E here in 1 star should be greater than E in 1 in the case of one generation. But if this is the case, also I should consume, the first generation, should consume more resources.
And they will have less resources, and even less and less and less across generations. Okay? So it seems that globally they will be much and much impoverished. Now, I'm calling this a repugnant conclusion word. It's not exactly a repugnant conclusion, because the original repugnant conclusion is, I'm sketched in this way. Assume that there is a different number choice. And I'm saying, okay, John said this, he's not considering different number choice, only the same number choice. In the original repugnant, we have a different number choice, and the idea is that quantity of lives of people living compensates quality of lives, and some of us reject the idea that this compensation is okay. Some of us find repugnant this compensation. This is the original repugnant conclusion. I'm using this as an analogy. My repugnant conclusion would be, okay, assume a same number choice, and assume that reductions in harms for future generation compensates reduction in other kinds of resources for them. Now, this compensation seems to me repugnant when it is leading to a progressive impoverishment. What about the iterated borrowing? Okay, each generation is using the strategy, and so each generation is gaining more resources, giving less resources to the succeeding generation, and then the succeeding generation again is trying to give in less resources to the succeeding, and so on and so on. I don't find that this is strikingly different. It seems to me that even in this case there is a repugnant conclusion. You could have this strategy. You could have a strategy in which each generation is doing the things, but it seems to me that, again, emission cut should be greater each generation, and the loss in resources should be greater each generation. So each generation is losing in terms of natural resources, even though it's gaining in terms of avoiding harms. And so it's basically the same. Okay, this is, I think, I can end here. I would only say three things, because three counter-objections would be raised. One is, okay, there are different applications. Those three applications are only possible applications, but John could say to us that this is not the way to apply, to implement them. And okay, that's true. I'm not saying that those applications are the only possible ones. Seems to me the plausible, seems to me the applications that one can think when reading the first time, but the proposal could be applied in very different ways. Another thing that could be said is, okay, you are saying that those progressive impoverishment in terms of resources compensated by a cleaner atmosphere is repugnant, but this is not repugnant, because those people, after all, are living well. They are living well. There are people now living very badly. So those people, after all, are living well. So I cannot say nothing. This is a big debate, and John brought something similar, if I understood, in Wayne Lyles, and there are people denying the repugnant conclusion. So, okay, if this is the case, I have difficulties. I find repugnant, or at least counterintuitive, having a policy leading to a progressive impoverishment. But this is simply intuition, so I don't have any argument to defend this. And also a third counter-objection is, okay, this is a political proposal. It's not an ethical proposal. So the fact that you are assessing the proposal from the point of view of ethics is improper, because it's only political feasibility. But I think that this is something that John himself could reject, because in much of his work he tries to say that even economists have an ethics, and even assuming that this policy is not an ethically driven proposal, we should say that it should be compatible with some ethical worries. Okay, even assuming there is not an ethical foundation, but I think that we could ask to the policy to be at least composable or compatible. And if the repugnant conclusion is repugnant, okay, that could be a problem. Thank you very much.